Hello and welcome to Psychology 102, week 3, part 2. So we did have part 1 on Monday, and I highly encourage you, if you have not had a chance to listen to part 1, please do, because it does kind of build onto this one as well. And you need to know it all anyway. So let's get started. I do have a lot to go over today. But again, understanding this stuff is really, really going to impact your life in a positive way. So welcome to week 3 agenda. For part 2 is a review of part 1 really quickly, very quickly. Personality theory, traits theories, more specifically on the trait is Carl Jung, and which you are all familiar with already because you've been doing the discussion. And then developmental psychology, we're going to talk again about Sigmund Freud's psychosexual stages, and then Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages. Now, I did discuss these in the theoretical perspectives video that I gave you in the resources. So if you want more details on more of the perspectives and how they work together, please go back to that. But we are going to focus just a little bit on Freud and Erikson today, as well as Jean Piaget, and then Goldberg's moral development and Jean Piaget's cognitive stages. So you're getting psychosexual, psychosocial, and then cognitive, and then moral. And then, of course, if you have any questions, please message me, text me, or join me Saturday in my office, Hopper Cafe. So week 3 objectives overall are emotional intelligence, stress management, conflict resolution, and the self. Again, everything that you can apply to your life today for a positive impact. And then part 2 for today is the stages of social development, cognitive and moral stages of development, and then again personality theory. But I'm also adding a little bit about assessment so that you kind of understand how many are out there, what to look for, what you should listen to, what you maybe shouldn't listen to, and so on and so on. So a review from part 1, we talked about the objectives for week 3, obviously, and then the important concepts that we did go over on week 1 and 2, and then some discussion board requirements, and then the IntelliPath reminders as well. And I am going to talk a little bit today as well about that. And then emotional intelligence, the self, and then perception, because without perception, it's really hard to understand the rest of it. So I went into depth with perception as well. And then again, we had questions. Now, IntelliPath, we are not going to explore IntelliPath. However, I do want to give you a quick reminder that grades will be posted on Thursday. However, that does not mean that these grades are final. Please remember, you can always go back and improve your grade. And even if you go back because you want some more understanding of it, even if you do this and you get a lower grade, that doesn't hurt you. It'll take your highest grade. So I encourage you, do your best and definitely strive for the best. That understanding, again, will help you. It will really help you in life. Now, we're going to jump quickly into personality. Overall, what is personality? So the word personality comes from the Latin word of persona, which means mask, which sounds quite abstract, but literally meaning we all interpret who we are based on the mask we wear. Pretty cool. In psychology, personality is one way to describe ourselves to some extent. Just using the word I in a sentence projects our personality. Things like things we like, dislike, hope, fears, think, strengths, weaknesses, etc. And then personality is a dynamic organization within the individual of those psychophysical systems that determine his unique adjustment with the environment. And that was from Alport. So personality is made up of a combination of behavior, temperament, emotions, and mental characteristics. And because of that, it can help to explain why we do the things we do, which we as humans are constantly curious about. We all want to know more about ourselves. It helps us. The psychodynamic theories will view personality to be relatively consistent through our life once it develops. Other approaches, however, in psychology, humanistic and social cognitive, would disagree and indicate our experiences can change our personality throughout life, which we can also kind of see that as well. So remember, go back to those perspectives and you'll understand how these all kind of intertwine. And it is a mix of the physiological or biological aspects, which is the nature, as much as our experience, which is the nurture. So we are looking at personality in this class because it does more than just influence our behavior, but how we think, feel, manage relationships, and so on. It's all it's all intertwined, not intertracted. My words are fumbling. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about are the trait perspectives, which focus on some of the fundamental questions about personality. How will we describe people? What are the basic units of personality? So consider how you would describe the personality of a close friend. Most likely you would think of a number of traits that you associate that person with, such as outgoing, kind, and even tempered. However, scientifically speaking, a trait would be defined as theoretical construct that describes that the basis of that personality. Again, it's describing the basis of personality. Basically, a relatively stable, here's the stable, characteristic that causes individuals to behave in a certain way. So traits theories focus more on the description of personality versus the causes of personality, okay? More of the description. While there are many theories on these traits, there are a few things that are agreed upon. First, that trait theories emphasize individual differences and characteristics that are less stable over time and across different situations. Okay, we can all relate to that as well. The trait approach recognizes that there will be different combinations of traits that forms a personality that will be unique to everyone. For example, neurosis or psychosis would be a combo of traits influenced by heredity. Such predispositions to traits like anxiety contribute to personality disorders. Okay, and we'll talk more about that closer to the end, or to the last week. Traits are usually inherited and can be influenced by every experience. Okay. Example, genes interacting with the environment, epigenetics, which we already talked about. Some traits change as we get older, but for the most part, trait theory assumes that once personality is developed, it's relatively stable. Cognitive processes also affect our intelligence, and based partly on traits we inherit, and those that we learn. Okay, the ability to adapt in life due to our traits and largely due to mental abilities. So the measurement of traits are emphasized through testing such as self-report questionnaires. That's what we just did, personality tests. Which we will discuss a few of those in a little bit. It's important to note that trait theory is focused more on identifying and measuring an individual's personality characteristics rather than providing solutions or treatments. Okay, so remember that. Now, a quick video to kind of explain it as well, pretty quick.
Trait psychology is an accessible way of looking at personality science. See, we use traits in everyday life to describe ourselves, describe others, and our behaviors. But which traits bring us all together as humans, and which one separates us as individuals? So in the past couple videos, I've described how personality psychologists have narrowed down the infinite list of traits to the most important traits that are present in all people. These traits are usually presented on a spectrum. For example, extroversion is frequently a trait present in important personality studies. All people display some levels of extroversion, but some people are definitely more extreme extroverts than others. As personality psychology has evolved, the number of important traits has changed. The so-called happy medium has included 5 traits that are present in some degree among all people. In this video, I'm going to be talking about these 5 traits and the 6th one that has made its way into popular personality psychology. So the original big 5 traits are also known as the Ocean model or the Canoe model. Ocean stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So let's take a look at each one of these individually. The first one is openness to experience. And most of these traits are actually pretty self-explanatory. The openness to experience trait describes people who are curious about the world around them and they feel comfortable trying out new things. These people tend to enjoy creative activities and are more inclined to exploring different areas of life or alternative ideas. People who score low on this scale usually don't break out of their comfort zone very often. Different activities, routines, or ideas may make them feel uncomfortable. The number 2 is conscientiousness, and I know it's a big word, but people who are more conscientious tend to pay more attention to detail and they put more effort into organizing their everyday activities. On the extreme end, you might call some people OCD. These people are more likely to plan out every detail of a vacation itinerary or reread their work a handful of times before they turn it in. Now, on the other hand, people who score low in terms of conscientiousness are usually more likely to let things happen without planning or organizing. In fact, on the extreme end of not being conscientious, some psychologists call this impulsiveness. Now, this is a good time to reiterate that a high score on all of these traits does not make you a better or a worse person. Depending on your values and the culture that you're raised in, you may view conscientiousness as a positive or a negative trait. In fact, like I said earlier, too much conscientiousness is associated with OCD disorders. Now, it's important to remember that personality tests will not tell you if you're a good person. They just tell you which traits you have and how they influence your decisions. Number 3 is extroversion. So extroverts are more likely to respond positively to the stimuli in the outside world. They feel more comfortable around lots of people and whenever lots of things are happening around them. They feel refreshed and energized after they get done talking to a group of people. Introverts, on the other hand, prefer to eliminate outside stimuli and focus inward. They actually feel drained after they talk to a whole bunch of people. You can also find introversion and extroversion on the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator personality quiz, which is something I'll talk about in a later video. Number 4 is agreeableness. People who are more agreeable are more willing to take action in order to make peace with others. Agreeable people are also more likely to be patient with others. But these type of people might sacrifice what they actually want just for the sake of others, or maybe to let go of angry feelings quicker. Researchers have put competitiveness on the other side of the scale here. So you're either agreeable or you're competitive. This trait still has some debate in the personality psychology world because honestly, not very many people want to be called disagreeable. This is why they have renamed it competitive. And lastly is number 5, neuroticism. Now this is the final big 5 trait and it's also known as emotionality by other personality theorists. People who score high on neuroticism are more likely to experience heightened feelings of anxiety, paranoia, depression, or aggression. Now, these feelings may have a large impact on the way that a person behaves or the way that they perceive the world around them. Now, just like the N in the PIN model that I talked about earlier, people high in neuroticism usually have higher highs and they also have lower lows. Now, I also want to let you know that there is a new development. It's called the honesty humility trait. Personality psychology is always evolving, and researchers have recently added a 6th trait to the Big 5 model. It's called honesty and humility. The addition of this trait has actually called for some tweaks to the acronym. Researchers have added an H to the Big 5. They started to represent extroversion with an X, and then they changed neuroticism to emotionality. And then they can change the acronym to form these 6 traits, and they call it the Hexaco model of personality. Basically the same thing as a Big 5. The honesty humility trait was starting to be added when the Big 5 started to expand beyond American studies. Researchers began to assess whether or not the Big 5 were present in languages other than just English. And as the research continued, they realized that all of the Big 5 traits were present, and honesty and humility kept appearing as an additional trait. Now, some personality psychologists believe that the honesty humility factor is the polar opposite of the traits found in the dark triad. The dark triad is another personality quiz that I'll be talking about next. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. A person who
Okay, so he pretty much gave you a good example of the big five, which is a huge uh, component in psychology, personality psychology, but also notice how personality psychology is continually growing and evolving, which psychology is. Again, it's not a stagnant science, it's continually improving and growing. So, some types of traits that I also wanted to give you. There's three types: cardinal traits, central traits, secondary traits. And as we were discussing earlier, um, those secondary traits, those have to do with those circumstances. So cardinal traits, those are the ones that dominate your personality. And then the central traits are your main traits that form your personality. And then you have the variable traits, which differ on the current circumstances. And I always give that example of, you may have a very passive mom um, um, that sees her child in danger, but when that circumstance happens, it's a mother bear is coming on. So that circumstance changed the situation and changed her behavior. So now we're going to jump into Carl Jung. Now, this is the test that you took for your discussion, and it's pretty cool. And I really like the way that Carl Jung does this and really goes into those feelings as well, and your insight. So this it's a little bit different than Myers-Briggs, which I also gave you an example of that too, so you can try that one as well. But what Carl Jung is notably known for, and possibly most popularly recognized for, is his theory on introversion versus extroversion. Jung defines introverts as someone who prefers the inner world of thoughts, fantasies, feelings, dreams, etc. What he would refer to as the ego more towards our persona. Okay, and I'll explain that ego a little bit more in a minute. So Jung felt that this part of the personality doesn't change and it lasts a lifetime. Also, that it was difficult for introverts and extroverts to get along, and often blames his clash with Freud because of this. So extroverts, according to Jung, have a breadth of interest, and introverts have less interest but are more deeply into them. So let's look at some of the tests that we have taken, some of the explanations that we've done. So an E refers to the let's talk it over. And they're more active, sociable, and the breadth of info in and interest. Want to always be with others and talking to others. And then the I is on the opposite keyword. Deep keywords are deep thoughts, a bit quieter, don't mind being by themselves, don't like to have to give immediate response. And this is important when you come to learning, and needs time to process in order to respond back. So that's a lot of why, like I've noticed some of my introverts, even here, when we are talking, I know this and it helps me relate to you because you do need to respond. You need to think about it before you respond. And that's pretty cool. And then the ones who are quick and can do it, that's also cool too, because that's usually me. But I'm also on that other side, and I can think. I sometimes if it's fresh information, I have to think about it. Now, this may tend to be more of an E versus an I, and not clear cut, but you will start to see you lean more towards one or the other. Okay. And if you haven't noticed, I am kind of more of an extrovert in this. Whether we are introverts or extroverts, we have to deal with both the inner and outer world, and we do so by 4 basic functions. Jung felt the S and the N developed through adulthood, and felt that we should develop both sides, even if we were more one side or the other, which is pretty true. I mean, in order to deal, we really do need to understand, again, that vantage point perspective. So sensing, um, the S is sensing, and then the intuition is the N. So Jung felt that these were different ways of getting information about the world. Some of us are good at literally observing and listening to the world around us, which is the sensing, while others are good at paying attention to our gut instinct and looking at the big picture. And if you didn't have a chance to watch that perspective video for top down and bottom up, I want you to notice the connections. So sensing, pay attention to details, relies on fact or data, and tend to be specific, practical, literal, black and white. Boom, right there. Famous S, President Harry Truman, President Richard Nixon. Okay. Intuition, on the other hand, relies on possibilities and the big picture of things. Don't weigh me down with the details. Insight, gut instinct, looks at patterns, concerned with future, imaginative, making associations, likes variety, and a mind reader. So famous people, Jung himself was an N. Famous Walt Disney, Marilyn Monroe, and I'm an N as well. Sensors rely on facts and data, and intuition relies on possibilities and the big picture of things. Don't weigh me down with the details again. So keywords: S, specific, present, practical, facts, literal, experience, black and white. I, insight, patterns, future, imaginative, associations, and variety. If you have not had a chance to take that test yet, I highly encourage you. I think you'll like it. Same with the T and the F. They developed through adulthood, and he felt that we should develop both sides, even if we were more to lean to one or the other. Again, the more well-rounded you are, it makes sense. So thinking is the T and feeling is the F. So similar to Freud, Jung felt emotion and thought were not always consistent. Thinking and feeling are ways in which we make decisions or judgments. Some people may find it is better to make decisions by using how they feel emotionally, making choices and increase positive emotions, for example, excitement, pleasure, and joy, and avoiding decisions that result in negative emotions, pain, sorrow, or anxiety. Others may feel it is better to make decisions based on how we think about things logically and rationally, considering our principles. Now, thinking tend to be logical, objective, impersonal, rational decision with head. Justice and fairness, follows same rules, analyzes principles, and so on. And then famous people, T. Freud, Aristotle, Einstein. Feeling people tend to be people-centered human values. Their decisions are from the heart, compassion, sympathetic, harmony or balance, empathy and fairness, and they can be flexible. Famous people are Emily Dixon, Albert Schweitzer, Vincent van Gogh, and so on. Thinkers like logic and analysis, and the feeling like warmth and sympathy. Keywords, T is logic, objective, and personal, rational, with head, justice, fairness, and so on. And then F people are person-centered, human values, decisions from the heart, and so on. Depending on your profession, you may find over time that you need to be a bit of both, and perhaps you have changed to do your job. Okay, so again, that emotional intelligence, understanding the self, and really understanding how you react based on your emotions. If you are curious, again, take that test. I want you to take that test. Now, Young asserts that we all have different proportions of these functions. Each of us will have a superior function which we prefer or is best developed, a secondary function which we are aware of and use to support that superior one, an inferior function which is poorly developed and unconscious but it's still there. So judging versus perception was added later by Myers-Briggs, which is one of the ones that I gave you, it's the specific test on that. And then judging doesn't mean judgmental, but are very organized. They know in advance, they're planners, perceivers, are more go with the flow of the type. So judging tend to like to plan, be organized, schedules, makes decisions, needs closure, goal-oriented, always meets deadlines, and likes control and limits. Perceiving, on the other hand, tend to be spontaneous, inquiring, less adapt to inquiring and easily adapt to situations. They're open to change, often distracted, like many options, flexible with deadlines. And that's not always great. J and P have a hard time getting along as quite the opposite. And you can see how they wouldn't. It is one where it might be shaped over time. Also, since too much P can get you into trouble, especially at work, if or it could also be based on who you hang out with, like your spouse, your roommate, partners, and peers. Okay, again, that environment. Judging doesn't mean judging again. Remember that. J and P have a hard time getting along, as it is quite the opposite. So remember that, and if you can understand the other side, and you got to have a little bit of flexibility, but then not too much. Okay, so now we're going to jump into the actual developmental psychology. So developmental psychology is the study of lifelong physical, mental, and social development. So this is where the development comes in. We will discuss several different theories that entail some of the following issues. Nature, nurture, how genetics is inherited. We've already kind of talked about that. Continuity and stages. Is it gradual, continuous development or sequential development? And stability and changes due to our traits persist throughout life, or do we change as we get older? So raise your hand if you have heard of Sigmund Freud. And yes, pretty much everybody has. Sigmund Freud was most famously known for his psychosexual stages of human development. Freud was very much on the nature side of the debate and believed that much of our development relied on fulfilling those biological needs through sexual instincts called the libido. However, as you can see, he also depended a lot of his findings on what and how the child learned from the parent or caregiver, which is environment. So he still had a bit of that. Freud had some interesting thoughts, which again, go back to the theoretical perspectives and you'll get more detail on him. So first off, he had the oral stage, which was birth through 1 year, and it focused on the mouth as that source of pleasure. But I usually say, to help you understand this, because the babies don't have necessarily the pleasure component like that, but comfort and security. Think about it like that. Oral gratification, that's that comfort part from the mom, and which is very, very important to development. You can see that. This is also, we're not going to go into depth on this, but where the id, the id is the child in us. We want instant gratification, so on and so on. And then anal stage focuses on anus, toilet training, conflict between those biological urges, and society norms. Okay, so now you have a parent during potty training telling you that no longer can you just go wherever you feel like it because you're used to having a diaper. Now you have to stop your urges. You have to stop that comfort. And we all know it feels pretty darn good if you've been holding your potty for a while and you or have a chance to go to the bathroom. So you can try to put yourself in the child's mind when it comes to potty training. And this is also when he said that the superego starts to get developed because we have the ego is the parent in us, the id is the child in us, and then the superego comes along and starts to make us feel guilty about not following those rules of the parent, which is the society, the societal norms. And then you got the phallic stage from 3 to 6, which focused on genital resolutions of the Oedipus complex, having attraction towards your parent or leaning more towards one parent or the other. And the Electra complex identifies with same-sex parents. Okay, so that's how we start to develop our own identity by those same-sex parents. And then the superego again gets even more developed, and you can see how that could really start to make it mess with us as well. And then the latent period focused on play with same-sex friends, schoolwork, libido seems to quiet down here. And then genital stage, it gets fired back up. Puberty starts, establish mature sexual relationships, pursue reproduction. Okay, so Freud believed that any issue during these stages could cause problems later on. For example, if during the oral stage, if a baby is not allowed to explore the world with the mouth, if it's taken away too quickly from nursing, that this can cause anxiety and results in he or she will become stuck in that stage. So the comfort, kind of always wanting something in your mouth, security, think about it, smoking, chewing on pencils, stuff like that. He says that this is where it came from, the oral stage. We got stuck in it because we didn't transition smoothly through it. So essentially, the baby becomes stuck in that stage, and that's who we are in the future. According to Freud, whether we are able to achieve each stage in development and overcome those challenges that are in those stages is how it determines what happens later. Also, what parents do can help or harm development, affecting us later in life. Again, that's the nurture side of it. I do have a video, but I'm going to have you find this on my resources and look at that really quickly, because it's an awesome video and will explain everything that I just did, but in a little more detail and a little smoother. So Erik Erikson is also from the psychoanalytic or psychodynamic perspective, similar to Freud. However, he reinterpreted Freud's psychosexual stages and focused more on the social aspects. So Erikson's theory is often considered to be psychosocial causes of development. For example, in the trust versus mistrust stage, infants must not only be able to develop trust through the parent and caregiver or caregiver's care, but also their response during that stage, which is neglect, reject, immediate response, healthy balance of each, and healthy balance of each for that conflict. And then, unlike Freud, Erikson expanded it to cover a lifespan and developed 8 stages. Okay, so Erikson's first 4 stages correspond to Freud's oral, anal, phallic, and latency stage. Freud's last stage, genital stage, is what Erikson put in his last 4 stages: identity versus identity confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, and integrity versus despair. So Erikson considered each of these stages not only in an individual point of view, but also from a social standpoint. So a teenager develops an identity based on the older generation's beliefs and values, and then it stretches into the circle around them that they start to build of peers. In each of his 8 stages, he involves a crisis or conflict that centers around a distinctive issue. Okay, this crisis can be called a developmental turning point. Out of each crisis, if the ego is able to emerge with strength, then it will have a positive development. If not, it will emerge with weakness. So in healthy development, the ratio of strength should be larger than the weakness. And really quickly, his view of the ego was also different than Freud. Okay, so Erikson believed that the ego Freud described was far more than just a mediator between the superego and the id. He saw the ego as a positive driving force in human development and personality. And as such, he believed that that the ego's main job was to establish and maintain a sense of identity. So you can see when we go into more detail about the trust and mistrust, the autonomy, autonomy, I can't speak anymore. Versus shame and doubt, this really has a huge impact on that ego, the identity. And initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus role confusion. It's a huge one too. Intimacy versus isolation, and generativity versus stagnation, and then integrity versus despair. So, and I'm not going to go into those details because we don't have enough time, but I probably will do another recording to help you just get a better grasp on that. But just based on that, I would like you to think of something. So I'd like to pause for a minute and just kind of reflect. Can you relate to the stages of development that Erikson explains in his theory? Or do you feel there are other explanations for how we develop? Now, there are some more explanations. So we're going to talk about Jean Piaget. And Jean Piaget is most famously known for his cognitive stages of development. Piaget believed that all children progress through these stages in the order you see here, okay? All in order. Although children may progress at different rates, he did not believe they skip or regress like the other ones back to any stages. Ultimately, the point of Piaget's theory is that all humans think differently as we develop. So let's look a bit deeper at what the like we can see the stages and really quickly. So with he has the birth to nearly 2 years, the sensoriometer, experiencing through senses and actions. And you can notice here with all of these explanations that they can all intertwine. I mean, they all have some good points, but 2 things that I do want to point out here is so what is the objective permanence? Now this one, look, the orange, it's in the orange right here, where this is like in sync with these stages. So this one is the awareness that objects, now remember, this is all about thinking. So the awareness that objects continue to exist when not perceived. Okay, so basically what is out of sight is out of mind. And you can kind of imagine this if you've ever played peekaboo with a baby, you're disappeared. You really did disappear. So you can see how that works. And then with the egocentrism, this one is difficulty perceiving things from another point of view. For example, if you ask a child to show mommy your picture, they will show the picture so that they themselves can see it. This can also be expressed in how a child thinks at this age. For example, if a child is asked if they have a brother and their name, they are able to respond, but then asked if that person, the brother, has a brother, they'll say no. So again, these are two main cognitive components that I wanted you to look at. So also egocentrism can affect adults as well. Okay, when they are not able to see something from another person's point of view. For example, if you assume something is clear to others, if it is clear to you, or that recipient will understand that it is a joke if it is funny to you. Keep that in mind. And then I do have another quick video resource. So I highly suggest you go to that resource. Again, it's in they are in my resources. Okay, now as with Erikson's stages of development, Goldberg stresses the importance of having a good idea of your identity before you enter adulthood. Part of this also involves the ability to make good decisions, even when the choices are tough and present a moral dilemma. Okay, so this is where the moral side of it comes. So think about your teenage years. Did you always make the right decision? Probably not. I can tell you I didn't. Most teenagers have difficulty with abstract thinking and looking at things from another person's point of view. There are still many of us that struggle with making the right decisions in adulthood. One of the prominent theories in moral reasoning lies with Lawrence Goldberg. He is an American psychologist whose theory is based on Jean Piaget's stages of cognitive development. Goldberg based his theory by compiling interviews of boys in middle and lower class in Chicago. His approach involved a 3 levels 7-stage theory in moral reasoning, like Freud did with his levels of consciousness. So remember, he had those 3 levels of consciousness as well. Goldberg believed people functioning at the lower level were motivated by self-interest, while those at the top level were operating to serve the common good, regardless of whether it would benefit them personally. Okay, so those are basically what Goldberg was talking. On an average, for level 1 pre-conventional morality, on an average preschool or early school age children are in this stage, and then he took this into like stage 1, obedience and punishment. And the earliest stage in development, they see rules as absolute, since obeying the rules would avoid the punishment. And then stage 2 of this level is called cost benefit, because children in this stage are motivated by the reward, or what we often call an extrinsic motivation, which we're going to talk about more. And then you have the level 2, the conventional morality, and then typically seen in elementary school ages as well. And then level 3, post-conventional. And then the post-conventional, this level is rarely seen before young adulthood, as the motivations for why you do something would become internalized, and you do the right thing based on what you morally believe is right versus considering other options. It is similar to the definition of integrity that I like to do it's kind of like, I like to do what is right thing, even when nobody else is looking. Okay, and then that goes more into stage 5, stage 6, and stage 7. Um, um, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about those details of stage 5, 6, and 7 as well in that later video. And I also talked about them in the perspective. So now I would like to give you a question, something to think about. Now, this is going to kind of jive the thinking about those morals. So in Europe, a woman was near death from cancer. The doctor found one drug that might save her. However, the pharmaceutical company selling the drug was charging $2,000 per prescription, 10 times what the drug cost to make. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but could only get together about half of what the drug cost. He told the pharmacist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it cheaper or give him the drug now with the money he had and let him pay the rest back later. But the pharmacist refused to sell the drug. Heinz got desperate and broke into the man's store to steal the drug for his wife. Okay, question. Should Heinz have done that? Why or not? Why not? And I want you to kind of consider those, what we just talked about with those levels of morals. And I do my discussions or my questions with the people that are here afterwards, but we had some great conversation, and really some of the things that I do want to mention, because they're not here for this recording, but I want to bring up and thank the people who did contribute. Terry and Jeffrey, amazing contributions to this discussion. Now, and these questions. So think about Goldberg's levels of morality here. The pre-conventional is concerned about whether Heinz will be punished for stealing and whether he will be able to live without his wife. Okay, so these are the questions in that pre-conventional stage. And then the conventional, this would focus on two things: whether the loving husband would do whatever he could do to save his wife, or whether he could get help from authorities, and what would happen to society if all its members broke the law. So this is more deeper thought into these moral decisions. And then the post-conventional is to consider whether attempts to save a life would be interpreted as breaking the law. Also may consider what kind of system could prevent the loss of an innocent life. Okay, so that's like in that stage 7 level, that cosmic orientation or transcendental morality, and considered hypothetical to some extent because Goldberg believed few people could reach this stage and had trouble scientifically proving that it existed. But this stage is when an individual stands by their beliefs, often religious ones, regardless of whether or not it defies all existing social norms. Okay, so you can kind of see where that goes. And then some additional questions to consider, which again, we had such a great conversation on. I invite you to our office, my office hours on Saturday, and we will discuss this even more. So if Heinz doesn't love his wife, should he steal the drug for her? So if he doesn't love her, should he steal it? Because we're thinking love, just think about it. I don't want to give you the answers. Suppose, and I don't want to guide your thinking. You think about it. Suppose the person dying is not his wife, but a stranger, because that goes into that question about an innocent life. Should Heinz still steal the drug for a stranger? Suppose it is a pet animal he loves. Should Heinz steal just to save the pet? Or why should people do everything they can to save another's life? Okay, that's a whole nother in-depth question about more. It really takes you even deeper. If it is against the law for Heinz to steal, does that make it morally wrong? Why should people generally do everything they can do to avoid breaking the law? How does this relate to Heinz's case? So just some thoughts to think about. So as we wrap this up, I do want to ask you one question, or just bring up another question. And this one I'll help you with. Why do we have so many competing points of view? Well, one reason is that no single theory can adequately explain everything that we know about behavior. Sometimes different theories focus on different aspects of behavior. Sometimes there is simply more than one way to look at something. Is the glass half empty or is it half full? Obviously, it's both. To take an example from another science, physicists wrestled for years with the nature of light. Is it a wave or is it a particle? In the end, it proved useful to think of light sometimes as a wave and sometimes as a particle. Similarly, if a business executive lashes out at her employee with stringent criticism, is she releasing pent-up aggression urges, which would be that psychoanalytic view? Or is she making a habitual response to a stimulus of incompetent workers, which is that behavioral view, learning to learn it? Is she trying to act like a tough boss? Because that's her key aspect of her self-concept. That's that humanistic view of the self. Or is she exhibiting an inherited tendency to be aggressive, a biological view, or a gene, nature? In some cases, all four of these explanations might have some validity, and you can see they could have some validity in all four of them. In short, it is an oversimplification to expect that one view has to be right while all others are wrong. Life is rarely that simple. In view of the complexity of behavior, it would be surprising if there were not a number of different theories. It's probably best to think of the various theoretical orientations in psychology as complementary viewpoints, each with its own advantages and limitations. Don't forget the limitations. Indeed, modern psychologists increasingly recognize that theoretical diversity is a strength rather than a weakness. And again, I can end that thought with, again, appreciating the uniqueness of others too. What can we learn and how can we apply psychology to life? It says it right there. So this is the information on the personality assessments that I did want to just quickly give you. You can stop the video. I'm not going to go over them specifically, but I encourage you to come on Saturday and we can talk more about these because there are so many. And you can see right here, even those projective techniques of analyzing people's personalities. These are examples of it. So there are so many out there. And I just want you to remember when they are self-reporting, you have to kind of think about validity and reliability. And I want you to watch this video most of all because it's huge and this will help you with your research in the future as well. So please, please, please text me or message me with any questions and I would love to discuss. We had a fabulous discussion on this, on questions on all of this, and we really got deep into thought about the moral our development of moral thinking as well. So thank you for joining. Again, my information is here. Text me or message me if you have questions. I'm here to help you. And have a wonderful day. And I hope to see you Saturday if you have the time to jump into my Hopper Cafe.